Emerging evidence shows that disruptions to learning during the pandemic negatively impacted academic growth and widened pre-existing disparities. How do K through 12 schools make up for that learning loss?
Well, I think there's a number of things that we can do, and because of the American Rescue Plan Act funding that's coming in, we're going to be positioned to do more of the things that we should be doing all along. I want to just start by saying that gap was there before the pandemic. We were alerted to it in part by the huge digital divide that occurred, that we saw. A third of kids did not have computers and hotspots at home to even engage in digital learning. Larger classes in a lot of communities. The impact of the pandemic, which was traumatic in very intense ways in communities of color and in low-income communities. All of those things, of course, were activated and contributing to this learning gap that is growing. What we need to do, of course, is put in the resources, not only for intensive instruction. We've learned a lot about how, for example, intensive tutoring can make a difference very rapidly in closing achievement gaps, and some states, California and many others, are putting those kinds of tools in place, but also counseling and social and emotional supports, because we learn when we are able to be positively engaged, when our brains are free of stigma, trauma, and anxieties that so many kids are carrying with them back to school. So the other piece of the puzzle will be the kind of supports for counseling and social and emotional learning that are necessary for students.
Well, we know that low-income students, students with disabilities, and many Black, Latino, and Native American students experience significant challenges with remote learning. These communities were also hit hardest by COVID-19 itself. And so I guess, how can public schools better consider and address the needs of marginalized student populations?
Well, we need to undo the inequalities that we already have in the system as we're recovering from the pandemic. So we have a very wide income gap in the country, the widest gap between the most wealthy and the lowest income since we've had that we've had since 1929, before the crash that occurred. The top 1% of people control 50% of the wealth, more wealth than the bottom 50% of people. So we've got to be able to move resources into the places where the needs are the greatest. On top of that, we often have unequal school spending. So we spend more money, public money, on the education of affluent children in many states, more than 30 states, than we do on the poor. So among the things we need to do is begin to rectify that, and that is beginning to happen. New York State, which has had a lawsuit for 30 years, going on to try to correct the big inequalities in funding, just announced that they'll begin to fund the more equitable school formula over the coming years. California has already made some strides in that direction, but it's doubling down on getting more resources to the students who need them most. And what do we do with those resources? We need to be sure that we are reducing class sizes so that it can be personalized, so that children can be directly supported by their teachers. We need to be sure that we're putting in place, as I said, the kind of mental health and social service supports. The federal money and much state money, as in California, where I'm on the State Board of Education, so I'm watching that closely, is going to support community schools, which provide wraparound services, social services, mental health, healthcare, so that all kids are able to be in school ready to learn. And so we have a big agenda for equity in the country. Many, many states are aware of this and pursuing it. The new federal money, $120+ billion to K-12 education, can be used to rectify a lot of these inequalities. And that's the agenda we need to have front of us.